Welcome back to your next lesson on your photographer. In this lesson, we will go over what photographers do, what's included, the different styles of photography available, a few sample shot lists, the typical fees associated with your photographer, as well as some money-saving tips. Let's start by talking about what actually photographers do. Your wedding photographer's duties include working with couples to capture special moments on their wedding day. And besides taking the photographs before, during, and after your wedding photographers are also responsible for artistically composing the shots and processing the images. Now, let's talk a minute about what's typically included in your photographer's package. Their time. The typical wedding photographer includes approximately 6 hours of coverage and includes an unlimited number of shots. Any additional hours will require an extra cost. An assistant or additional photographer. If you're having a large wedding that will require a second photographer or an assistant, you can expect to pay an additional fee for that second person. Their travel costs. Keep in mind that if your photographer has to drive a long distance to attend your wedding, you may have to pay a per-mile fee. Also, if your photographer needs to fly in order to attend your wedding, you may have to pay for airfare and accommodations, especially with destination weddings. Your images and editing of your images. Most photographers' fees include the cost of the actual images and can be obtained through an online gallery or a USB flash drive. Taking the shots on your big day is only half of the work that a photographer does. Remember, it is the editing and retouching to make your photos amazing that is the largest part of the photographer's fee and time. Prints and albums. Now, most photographers offer with their packages a print credit, which is money that can be put toward purchasing actual prints. It's important to remember, while you don't have to purchase your prints through the photographer, most likely they will come out better if you do. And print releases. And while we're on the subject of prints, it's important you ask your potential photographer about their print release policy. If you have never heard of this before, a print release means you can use the photos for your own personal use. But in most cases, that does not include a full copyright release, meaning you don't own the photos, cannot sell them, and your photographer is allowed to use your photos for marketing purposes. Some additional items your photographer may be able to offer you are your engagement session photos, a wedding album, a parent's album, a second day shoot, shooting your rehearsal dinner, or additional flash drives. Now that you know a little bit more about what your photographer can offer you, let's talk a minute about the different types of photos available. First, we start with digital photography. Digital photography is definitely the most common way a photographer shoots a wedding nowadays. The biggest reason for this is that you often get to see your photographs days after your wedding instead of weeks. One major advantage of digital photography is that the cameras can shoot your photographs in very low light, which is common for most weddings as they usually tend to go from afternoon into the evening. Photographers who shoot with digital film are also able to preview their shots and adjust them as needed, giving them more freedom with angles and light options. They're also able to adjust the tones, depth, and sharpness during the editing process, unlike with film, and can even turn the photo into black and white after it's shot instead of having to choose beforehand. A major selling point for digital photos is that they cost considerably less to develop than film. However, they do take a bit more processing time because the photographer will need to apply edits to all the images. Also, a digital shooter can shoot more freely, like taking multiple frames of an image with the hope that one or two of the images will capture the perfect moment, and they can take risks on whether a shot will turn out or not because it's not costing them money on the film. Film. On the other hand, if you're the type of bride who wants your photos to have a soft and organic quality to them, You may opt to have your photos shot with film. Film allows for a better range of highlights and shadows. There is a unique depth, softness, and quality of light that comes from a well-shot and professionally processed film that unfortunately digital photographers will have to spend quite a bit of time editing in order to replicate. But keep in mind that shooting with film is more work as well as more money. Film costs more because each shot the photographer takes has a value to it. Along with the rolls of film, processing and editing images take a lot more time because the photographer will need to send the photos to their lab to be processed and then edit them. And because the photographer knows they must be mindful of every single shot, you will likely receive less images than you would in a digital collection. Then we have the mix of both. If you're having a hard time making a decision, remember, you can always ask your photographer if you can have a mix of both digital photos and film. Now let's go over the different styles of photography. Traditional types of photography are more formal with a classic posed photography style. Photojournalism. This style is all about telling a story. The photographer captures candid and sometimes emotional moments rather than posed portraits. Fashion. If you're looking to have photos that focus on your attire and accessories and even perhaps look like they could have been in a magazine, then this may be the style that you consider. Most photos use backdrops, poses, and sometimes even props. Vintage photography is a style of photography that gives your photos an old school feeling using different techniques and filters. And last but certainly not least is the fine art style of photography that is all about abstract images and dramatic arrangements. The photographs are created in accordance with the vision of the photographer. Now I wanted to go over some sample shots with you. And don't worry, if we go a little too fast, these shot lists are in the right-hand side download section of this lesson. Did you know that 42% of couples opt to do a first look? Here are a few shots you may want to consider of the bride before the ceremony. A few shots of the groom you may want to get before the ceremony. Here is a list of a few shots you may want to consider during the ceremony. You may want to consider some of these shots before your reception. Here is a list of some shots you may want to consider having taken during the reception. Now let's talk about the typical photographer fees. Now, some factors that you'll want to consider that go into the pricing of a photographer are how far they must travel, their level of expertise, the number of guests you'll be having and if additional photographers will be needed, the types of packages you would like, as well as the film style you would like your photograph shot in. Now, with all that being said, the average cost of a wedding photographer will run about $2,000. Having the proposal photographed, incorporating Instagram in the wedding and having everyone upload their photos using a specific hashtag, slow motion shots, having photos taken in your dress before the big day for portraits, father-daughter first looks, photo booths, backlit photos, having photographs taken the day after the wedding, as well as selfie shots. Now let's go over some tips about your photography. To save some money, have your guests be your photographers. If you have your ceremony and location in one place, you will save money on the photographer's travel as well as time. Shooting in digital film is the least expensive option. You could choose to have a photographer for less hours to capture just certain shots if you're trying to save some money but would like a few professional photos taken. If you have a friend who is a photographer, you can ask them to take your pictures at a discounted rate. And you'll want to remember to get a personal use release if you plan on printing your own photos or using them in any way. And sometimes, if your photographer also offers videographer services, you can choose a package that includes both at a discount.